Welcome to Fintech Daydreaming, the podcast that dives into the world of banking technologies and the ever-changing landscape of fintech companies. We bring you real-life examples from global and local thought leaders, as well as experts working within the financial industry, and seek out the best stories from the front lines of financial services innovation, where dreams of industry pioneers meet reality. Hosted by Pål Krogdahl and Ville Sointu. This is Fintech Daydreaming.
Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Fintech Daydreaming, where Ville Sointu and I dive into the fantastic world of everything bank technology and fintech. We are daydreaming on a daily basis, and we know the rest of you are as well. So let's continue that fantastic journey of looking at what is hot, what is interesting, what's exciting, and what maybe isn't always so cool and interesting in the world of fintech. Today, we've got some real cool stuff heading our way again. We kicked off a really interesting discussion in the last episode, looking in at digital identity, self-sovereign identity, and what's happening and growing in the Nordics. And we decided we were going to continue that story and go a little bit further today. But before we do that, I would be remiss to not introduce back my friend and co-host and partner in Fintech Daydreaming, Ville. Ville, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing good, doing good. I feel like today is like the first day when I can say, well, maybe the spring is here. But in Finland, we usually have like at least 5 false starts for the spring. So I'm expecting snow again in a week or so. So let's see how it goes. But at least for now, it's nice and sunny.
Yeah, I noticed it was plus 10 degrees outside today. So that almost feel like summer stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We might not be skiing in June, but let's see.
Maybe not. Although I did go snowboarding this weekend with my son. It was the second time in his life that he's been downhill skiing, and he's absolutely hooked now. I actually asked him, so what do you prefer, downhill skiing or Minecraft? What do you think he answered?
Both.
No. He said downhill skiing.
Nice.
I mean, it shocked me. So
that is shocking.
Yeah, he's found his legs again. No longer a nerd like his father, but I'm sure it will change when the summer comes along.
Yeah, just give it time.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to continue down the journey of digital identity, all the cool stuff that's going on in the Nordics. And to do so, we've actually brought one of your friends with us, right, Ville?
That's right. So as some of you might know, I'm a board member in something called FindyNet cooperative, and Markus Hautala, who is our guest today, is the chairman of that. So full disclosure there. But Paul, why don't you bring Markus in?
Well, I can. Well, he's your friend, right? But yeah, Markus, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us. And not only are you, the chairman of FindyNet, you're also head of digital identity at TietoEvry. So you are spending every waking moment of your time focusing in on the world of digital identity, self-sovereign identity, and where we're heading towards this nirvana world of being able to authenticate ourselves and do transactions online in a safe, secure, and identified way. Maybe just very quickly, how did you get to this fantastic role that you've got today?
I suppose pretty much the same way as Ville did. So We actually started this journey back in 2017, if I remember correctly. We were both enthusiastic about blockchain and its possibilities. And the one thing that we actually stuck with was digital identity. We are going to talk about self-sovereign identity specifically today. And blockchain was something which really kickstarted this movement back in 2017. All of the technologies and governance models are emerging from that domain. So that's when I got involved with digital identity.
Yeah, I remember that distinctly. And in 2017, it was all about the blockchain and how can we actually utilize blockchain in this world. And then funnily enough, I think the conversation around blockchains themselves have kind of disappeared a little bit. It's there in a lot of the concepts that we still do, but the notion of putting all the data on the blockchain and so forth, has that discussion has changed, I think. But again, we usually have a saying in this in our podcast, which is that let's take a step back. And this is not to kind of jump to the deep end too much of these conversations on step one. And let's start from something that was mentioned already a couple of times in this even in this episode, and that is the self-sovereign identity. So building on what we talked about in the last episode with my colleague Mikko, who gave us a great overview of the Nordic digital identity, especially the bank-driven digital identity ecosystem that we have built here in the Nordics, we felt that it's an interesting way for us to start to bridge into the future, what we believe is one of the possible futures of identity services here in the Nordics and all over the place. And that indeed is self-sovereign identity. So Markus, I mean, based on our journey together and what we've learned along the way, can you explain to our listeners what is self-sovereign identity, and perhaps how does that link to what we have today in the bank-driven digital identity space, and how is that bridging to that going to happen maybe?
Yeah, when we talk about digital identity and self-sovereign identity, it can be very, very abstract topic. It's like if you would ask a regular man or woman on the street to define what is internet, they probably wouldn't be able to do it. And it's probably the bit same when we talk about self-sovereign identity. But if I try to explain it very briefly, what it is that if we think about the current internet, it's essentially a network. But what is missing from the network is trust, being able to trust on the information and individuals and the information that these individuals share. So in one way, you could imagine self-sovereign identity being this sort of a trust layer on top of internet, an internet of trust for data. But then that is kind of the abstract way of explaining what self-sovereign identity is about. But what will be more understandable for regular people is that and how can they use self-sovereign identity is that they will be able to have a digital wallet, most likely a mobile phone app or similar, and they can store all of their identity data in that wallet, and then they can share that when, for example, they need to access e-services or whatnot. So, and they will be able to control their data. So the difference being obviously that typically when identity people talk about digital identity, they see this sort of a paradigm shift of moving from centralized identity to decentralized identity. And what centralized identity means is that there's a centralized entity who controls what data you have and how you can share that to for example, when you access these services, whether those centralized entities would be banks or big tech or whatnot. But decentralized identity and self-sovereign identity empowers these individuals and obviously in the future organizations also to be able to better manage their own and share their own data.
So I'll take the role that I had in our last episode and be the ignorant one between you two fantastic melon brains. We hear an awful lot of discussions around Web 3.0, and I hear similar definitions and descriptions when people are talking about Web 3.0. Is there a synergy here, a very tight connection between when we talk about sovereign identity and the foundations of Web 3.0? It sounds almost like the two hang together very tightly.
Yeah, I would say that self-sovereign identity is one domain of within Web 3.0.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Web3 is a kind of a moving definition. Everybody tends to redefine Web3 to suit their narrative, but in this case, I actually agree. I think it's key that you control your own data, the access to your data sources, and you do it with something like a digital wallet. And you mentioned that, Markus, that the wallet would perhaps be a mobile phone application, something that you use to maybe see how, or you are using that application to share data points about yourself to other entities. Now, what would that look like in practice? Is there any kind of use case in your mind that would maybe illustrate how would that work on a day-to-day basis in the use of using this wallet to control your data?
Yeah, there are obviously quite a lot of use cases which have already been rolled out. I mean, often when people start to talk about self-sovereign identity, they talk about the fact that you can get rid of usernames and passwords and log in with these sort of wallets to various types of services. But I would say that that's one of the more traditional use cases. But what especially excites us is that you can actually exchange any type of data and prove anything about yourself by using these digital wallets. So, for example, being able to prove that you have a driving permit, to be able to prove your professional credentials, to be able to prove that you've been vaccinated or whatnot. And one that is particularly interesting to us is e-receipts. So, and the reason why e-receipts, it doesn't necessarily sound like a big use case, but if we think about our regular wallet and when do we mostly use it, we probably use it most when we go to a shop and get a receipt when we buy something. But the problem today with the existing receipts is that you can't actually use them really conveniently. So, for example, in a context of let's say that you ask for insurance compensation or file a insurance claim. Today in Finland, only in Finland, we're a population of 5.5 million people. In Finland only, there's the size of insurance fraud is approximately 100 million euros on an annual basis, and in large share of that fraud emerges from fraudulent and forged paper-based receipts. So that alone is quite a big use case.
Clearly, yeah. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I was just going to say we've intermixed here now the discussion as well around blockchain and self-sovereign identity. Is there an assumption here or a given that blockchain has to be the technology underneath this, or can the same solutions be delivered and managed without blockchain?
Now we are going to the deep end, right? So,
yes.
gradually.
Yeah. So the answer is yes. But that is something which is currently being explored. So it emerged like we discussed this whole technology from blockchain, but it has moved on since then, and different types of technologies have been developed so that you wouldn't even need to have blockchain underneath. And one of the most interesting technologies related to that is called Kerry. And for example, Glaive, who issues legal entity identifiers, has started to use that technology. So, and they are already piloting this. So, actually, what organizations and individuals will be able to do going forward is that they can get a digital proof from Glaive, which states what sort of roles and responsibilities the individual has vis-a-vis a certain organization. And in Glaive's implementation, they are actually using this Kerry, which doesn't mandate the use of any type of blockchain.
Okay. Wow, we really went to the deep end.
Yeah.
So
sorry about it.
No worries. First of all, what we're going to do is we're going to post links to those initiatives in the show notes. So if you're interested, dear listeners, you can go and check out those links to get into more details of those things. But what you mentioned there is actually very interesting because, again, ultimately, the way I see self-sovereign identity ecosystems building is that they are building as networks. Doesn't matter if it's blockchain or peer-to-peer, whatever you have behind there, but it's ultimately about standardization and interoperability. There has to be a common language for these systems to talk when we're talking about business applications like corporate identities and how to tell whether a person is entitled to do signing, for example, on behalf of a company. So what is your thinking around, I mean, you mentioned a couple of initiatives on the data standardization, but what's your thinking around what is the future of interoperability and standardization in this space, and maybe what's the current state?
Yeah, that is obviously something which remains to be seen. In our view, one of the most promising standardization initiatives is, especially when we talk about holistically about this whole stack which is needed to bring self-sovereign identity solutions to the market, is called trust over IP. Mm-hmm. And that work is being shared within the Trust over IP Foundation, which kind of acts within the or is part of the Linux Foundation. And so, but then there are other standardization initiatives ongoing or have already been completed by, for example, W3C when it comes to verifiable credentials, digital identifiers, and so on, as well as then on protocol level, there's a Digital Identity Foundation, which has developed different types of standards. But we need to remember that mostly when we are talking about this, when we are talking about self-sovereign identity and these technologies, we are talking about the digital trust layer. But digital trust can only get us so far. On top of digital identity, you need to have a human trust layer. So being able to, because trust on the highest level is founded on contracts. And so we need to also develop these sort of different types of business ecosystems and alliance common rules and rules for those business ecosystems. And now that I suppose many of the people who are listening to this podcast are bankers, so this is obviously nothing new to them. This is something which has been going on for, I don't know, centuries, decades when it comes to banking industry. So that the whole sort of fabric of banking is founded on common contractual frameworks and such. Mm-hmm.
So linking the contractual trust and human trust into the digital world, I guess that's the goal here. And we've talked about even on this podcast before that the disconnect of purely online digital trust, like are defined by the open blockchains, might not actually be compatible with the legal system that we have on the ground that actually gives this legal recourse for the transactions and contracts that you make in the digital world. And maybe this actually links. Maybe we shift gears a little bit on the conversation, and something we also mentioned in the last episode with Mikko was that while we have this bank-driven digital identity ecosystem in the Nordics up and running, and you can use it for several purposes, but now it seems like the European Union is coming up with their own digital identity system, which apparently is going to be covering all of the European Union states, and we will all get this digital passport on the European Union app. And they also talk about wallets. So how does the European Union digital identity, in your view, Markus, link to the concept of self-sovereign identity, and how could it be perhaps linked, or is it linked at all to this thinking of self-sovereign identity?
Yeah, we were actually very excited last June when EU published the new eIDAS proposal, because it had all of the right terms there when they talked about the individuals being able to control their own data. They talked about digital wallets and so on. So it seemed that self-sovereign identity was all over the proposed regulation. So on a surface, the right elements are there, meaning that public authorities would be able to issue different types of credentials. We talked about driving permits, your national identity card of sort, and these sort of things, and being able to control them via your wallet. But since then, the eIDAS toolbox working group has started to draft and go into details how this should be implemented, and that has actually raised some concerns. And one particular concern for us has been that different e-services providers, so for example, and with e-services, I'm referring to a service that you would access with your digital wallet. They have started to mandate that these e-services should all be registered to the EU Commission. And in our view, that will significantly reduce the scalability and applicability of the EU ID. So this is just now a draft proposal, so it remains to be seen if this will remain. But that's one specific difference between SSI and the EU ID. The other one being that now when we're talking about this different standards and how people and entities could interact with their chosen tools, one big difference with SSI is that on a high level, essentially what we, for example, are trying to build within Findi is a network of wallets. So everyone who has a wallet would be able to communicate with one another. But the EU seems to have a much more traditional way of looking at this, so that there would be public sector entities who issue credentials then to your wallet. Then you would be able to use that wallet whilst you interact with certain registered entities. So it's much more narrow than what we're now talking about SSI, and it remains to be seen whether that is going to be something interesting for private sector or not.
So I can imagine or assume to a certain degree that some of our listeners are probably sitting there trying to think about, identity. They're thinking about logging in to websites. Maybe some of them have started thinking about or interacting with login with Apple ID or login with Facebook, login with Google. But when we're sitting here now talking about self-sovereign identity, or SSI as you've called it, we're talking a lot wider scope here. We're talking about having your driving license available. We're talking about having elements of your identity available. Are we also then seeing the ability to hide your identity to a certain degree, so that when you're logging onto websites, there's a deferred association that says, well, I don't actually want to log on to a specific website as Pål Krogdahl. I just want to be authenticated as a user on the internet with the ability to undertake whatever it is that I'm wanting to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we take a step back and try to define what SSI and this digital wallet sort of allow you to do, you could actually imagine being able to store your digital twin in a wallet. So the amount of information that you could potentially store in your digital wallet about yourself is more or less infinite. So it's much broader than authentication and identification and so on. But then back to your question about being able to sort of selectively disclose information about yourself. And would you always need to tell who you are? And for example, if you would need to prove your age to be able to, for example, buy alcohol online or whatnot, would you need to be able to, would you need to disclose your full birth date and all that? And the answer is that you wouldn't have to disclose any information that you're not willing to do. So, for example, as far as your age is concerned, you wouldn't have to prove what your real age is. It would be possible for you to just prove that you're over 18. Yeah. So that also allows people to control much better in terms of what type of information they want to disclose about themselves. And I have full control over it.
You actually brought up, sorry, Ville, just one last question. You brought up another element there that I think a lot of our listeners maybe will sit there and think about. You said large amounts of your data will be stored in your wallet. To me, that almost sounds to a certain degree like I won't say single point of failure, but isn't there a risk here or a fear by certain individuals that if suddenly everything that's got to do with you is stuck on a wallet, and you mentioned, you know, an app on a mobile phone, isn't that a fantastic nirvana dream for identity theft and criminals wanting to get as much information on an individual as possible?
The way that these sort of SSI solutions are built is that, first of all, all of the data will be encrypted if you decide to store it in your wallet. And the other thing is that this will not be stored in a, let's say, in a big tech database. It will be under your own control. So it's not a honeypot in the sense that if we think about the identity theft that has taken place during the past few years, these sort of solutions are not vulnerable in the same sense, because there's no single honeypot. And even if people would be able to access this data from your wallet and copy it to some other place, they actually wouldn't be able to use it, because they would be lacking your digital keys to be able to use that data.
Yeah, and you talked about verifiable credentials and using them to do things like proving your age. And one of the things that on the bank side of things we'll be looking at, of course, is that what are the most complex things that our customers are doing, and how could we make those processes simpler? And as a regular bank customer, one of those is of course the mortgage application. I think that's a great example of this, because both the bank who is giving the loan, they need to know things about you. They need to be certain that certain things and facts about you are true. Now, this is a collection of things from various institutions, both public and private. And ultimately, the process is to verify those things, those claims that you make on the mortgage application is a tedious and sometimes very manual process. So it feels like verifiable credentials using self-sovereign identity would be a good way to solve this from two angles. From the bank's side, they can be certain that when you make a claim about yourself, about your existing debt or your credit viability and things like this, the bank can be certain that those things are true. And then on the other side, for you as the person applying for the loan, then you can easily share those facts without going into all these various places to collect the data and re-enter them into the application. And this brings to mind the next question that we had, Markus, to you as well, is that we talked about the European Union digital identity, and it sounds like that's going to be a very, very public and government-driven, centralized type of way of doing the digital identity. Yet the things we're talking about here seems to be also involving the private sector very much. So, and then of course you cannot help but think about the big techs as well. So as we kind of set forward and start building these networks with the wallets and the data sources and the users of the data, who is going to build all this stuff? Is it going to be all public? Is it going to be all private? Are they going to be competing with each other? And what does Facebook and Google and the other big guys say about all this?
Yeah, well, I haven't been speaking with Google and Facebook lately, but I have some guesses in terms of where this might lead. I mean, if we go back a couple of years, how we kind of believed that this would start, especially in Finland, we thought that this would start that in the way that as long as we build this sort of a infrastructure which can be used for anything, then people will come and build on top of it. Definitely that hasn't yet happened, and it's taken us a while to build that infrastructure. And I've actually started to think about this a bit deeper in terms of how do we actually get this going. And if we look at this on an international scale, and the SSI implementations which have succeeded, they've been actually quite narrow in their scope, very specific in terms of what is the problem that they solve. Like, for example, we talked about the vaccination credentials, and there are some other ones which have been fairly successful. I think that's most likely going to be the model for rolling out the SSI. You need to define the ecosystem where you want to roll out this solution. In most likely, the ecosystem has to be relatively small and then scale. So it's kind of probably going to be a sort of a business first approach. Be super clear about the problem that you solve and then scale. And in terms of who is going to start to roll out these solutions, I think it's going to be all different types of business domains, whether that would be banking or retail or insurance or even public sector. I think they will all start to roll these sort of solutions out. And our hope is just that they would be interoperable, so that the end users don't end up with hundreds of different wallets.
Mm. So it sounds like public-private cooperation or a partnership. Okay.
At least that's the desire.
Yeah.
So where does FindyNet fit into this?
That was my next question, Paul. So let me try to summarize the conversation so far as we lead into the Findi question. So we have been teasing this FindyNet now for a while now for our listeners. So let's kind of recap a little bit. So what we've established so far, the self-sovereign identity concept of the giving the users the ability to have access and control over the data. We talked about that. We linked that into the standardization and interoperability efforts, leading into the European Union digital identity being part of this enabling components to make all of this happen. And we also agree, I think, that this probably needs to be a public-private partnership type of, or at least a cooperative effort in order to achieve interoperability and the necessary standards to make this happen. Now, having said that, we talked about FindyNet now for several times, but let's go a little bit, double click on that a little bit. So what is Findi? Why is Findi? And how does it fit into this picture that we just painted here?
Essentially, what Findi aspires to be is a Finnish network of wallets. That's very briefly what it's all about. Mm-hmm. And so when we started, I spoke about the internet and how does SSI relate to that. So you could imagine kind of Findi being the Finnish segment of the Internet of Trust. That's kind of the ambition for it. So it's this sort of a basic plumbing of trust and infrastructure layer that we are trying to build, which will not immediately be visible to any end customers. instead, what the end customers will see and evidence is these digital wallets, which are then kind of connected to this network through common standards and common contracts amongst these agreed amongst these different wallet providers.
So does that mean that in the future I would use my FindyNet wallet to authenticate myself with the Finnish tax authority and share certain data points which is in my Findi wallet with the tax authority to help to maybe do my self-certification for my yearly tax, as an example?
Exactly. Yeah. Except that you most likely wouldn't be using a Findi wallet. Most likely you'd be using something like a Nordic wallet, which is then connected to this network.
Okay. So is it, I mean, I might be going on a limb here, but is it a little bit like having a mobile wallet for your payment cards, and then the payment cards inside your wallet are using either MasterCard or Visa or Amex or any card network, but the actual wallet where the cards are is provided by whoever is your bank typically? Is it the same for these digital wallets? So let's say, I mean, you mentioned Nordea, so you would have your Nordea wallet, which would have like this FindyNet capability built in, but not necessarily like a brand that is might or might not be visible. But ultimately, the application itself is Findi powered, but not Findi by itself.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, so it's Findi compatible, so it adheres to the rules and standards set by the Findi consortium or Findi co-operative.
All right. So that starts to make a lot of sense, I think. Paul, being the outsider here, does it make sense to you?
It does make sense to me. I'm wondering what sort of timeline or horizon we're looking at here. When will self-sovereign identity be a given and natural for every citizen in Finland? Is this something we're expecting to happen next Tuesday, or is this something that's going to happen in 5 years' time?
If I would have to pick from those two, I would most likely say 5 years from now.
Right.
So who knows? But like we discussed earlier, I think it's going to these sort of solutions are going to start to roll out gradually within specific domains. Yeah. So it might be that some people are using these already on a regular basis, let's say 2 years from now, but then some other people might not have any need for these sort of solutions until 5 years from now. Obviously, we hope that this would happen sooner, but at the moment, I suppose the biggest obstacle is everyone who has tried to establish or launch any type of ecosystem initiatives, the technical and Ville knows this well. So the technical development time is short in itself, but being able to agree with all of the ecosystem parties or partners takes a while. So that is kind of what is hindering the development the most at the moment.
So on a global scale, where does FindyNet sit in leadership or trailblazing versus other parts of the world?
As far as branding, at least as far as branding is concerned, I think we're there in the top, not the first one, obviously, but quite in the top. So there are few very well-known initiatives. The first one, obviously, being Sovereign, so sovereign.org. That was the first one. Then the other one, which is quite famous, is ID Union in Germany, and they actually received quite a lot of funding from the German government about year ago. and they have already taken certain use cases to pilot, and the German government even has taken certain use cases into production, like for example being able to prove your driving permit. So those are most likely some of the most well-known, let's say, infrastructure initiatives, such as Findi. But then there are certain other industry-specific initiatives. For example, the one launched by credit unions in US. Now I forgot the name. Ville probably remembers it.
I think it was called CU Ledger or something, but then it was...
No, it was some past, but now I forgot it. So that is something which is already up and running, and then there are some other ones like Good Health Pass and these sort of things, but they are more narrow in their scope and in terms of scalability and so on.
Okay, so sounds like we're gonna post a lot of links in the episode description this time, because this topic is so deep. It's difficult to cover all those things, and they're all of them so really interesting as well. But kind of running to the end of the episode here, I'm just actually going to coin a new term which I invented, which is something I would like to call blue sky reverse engineering. So let's say 10 years from now, we are living in a society where everything we just talked about has become reality. I'm able to control everything, all aspects of my data and my verifiable credentials using my digital wallet. It all works really nice. I'm able to deal with both public and private institutions and protect my data, which is the vision that we've kind of described here. But reverse engineering from that point in time, what do you think are the things that we did right so that we actually arrived in that place? What do you think are the key milestones and key achievements between now and 10 years from now that were done correctly and went exactly the right way? I know it's a complicated question, but I'm gonna push it to you to try to vision that maybe.
So you're asking me to envision the dream state and then kind of, okay.
Yeah.
So what would be my...
So what were the key milestones, achievements, and decisions that we did right in order to...
So this doesn't have to do anything with reality and what the reality might actually be. Okay, very good. So what I hope that we get right is that we get the standards right, so that can have sort of really general purpose tools in our use. Sort of the kind of a role model would be something like email, which is fully standardized. You can have your email service provider be whoever you want, but still you can communicate with everyone else over the whole globe. So that would obviously be the sort of a dream state for digital credentials, so that you could, regardless where you go, you could take your data alongside and prove something about yourself. So that would be the dream state. So standardization is essential. And then it also means that we don't only have to get the technical standards right, but we need to get the regulation right. So that, for example, we can get these credentials from the public sector into our wallet so that we can use them, for example, if we travel. So that's the other thing. And but how do we get there? We probably get there, like I said, through this development will be driven by different types of business ecosystems who need to solve their concrete problems. That's really the way to start. And obviously we could spend an endless amount of time in standardization and all these sort of collaborative initiatives on let's say on the infrastructure layer, but I don't think that will get us far. What will get us sooner where we want to be is through solving real problems that people and organizations have.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. So we need to win the technical standardization battle. We need to agree on those things. The regulation needs to support it in order to create the trust. I completely agree on those things. And then finding the actual problems that we're trying to solve. I think emphasizing on that is of critical importance, because otherwise, if you're not able to articulate the what is the problem that this thing is solving, then ultimately, as we have learned from several of our guests from previous episodes as well, if you're not able to answer that question, then you need to rethink your position, maybe. But time is running, and time really goes fast when you're having fun, like we like to say here on the podcast. Markus, was there anything that we forgot to talk about today that you wanted to mention?
We forgot to talk about a lot of things, but I don't have anything particular in mind. Maybe for Paul, was there something new for you?
Yes, I've learned an awful lot. I've expanded my understanding of both digital identity from the last episode, and now also self-sovereign identity. I've learned that I need to call it SSI. No, I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have as well. Actually, one of the things that we like to do on this show is give a lighter side to our podcast as well, Markus. And we ask our guests if they maybe have a good but bad joke that they'd like to share with our listeners. So I think to round off this episode, maybe have you got a joke you'd like to share with us all?
Yeah, I hope this is not applicable to our endeavors in when it comes to SSI, but here's one.
Yeah.
A man visits a bank manager and asks, "How do I start a small business?" And the manager replies, "Start a large one and wait 6 months."
I'm really glad that's not the direction that our podcast is going in. So we're definitely seeing growth in the right direction. But it's been fantastic. It's been a really, really good discussion. We are running out of time as always. So Markus, if our listeners would like to understand more, maybe get a deep dive into FindyNet, understand better around self-sovereign identity, how can they reach you? How can they find you?
I suppose the simplest is via LinkedIn. So just search there or email markus.hautala@TietoEvry.fi.
Fantastic.
Sorry, com.
Do you want to repeat that to make sure it's correct?
TietoEvry.com.
TietoEvry.com. Okay, fantastic. So thank you very much yet again for joining us. It's been a really good discussion. And to our dear, fantastic listeners, thank you for sticking with us for yet another episode. As always, we're going to ask you to hit the like button, smash the subscribe button, and leave us a comment. We really are appreciating the discussions that we are getting on our channels. And as we always say, the algorithm loves the comments even more, and it helps build our visibility and followers out there. So please do that. We will be back in 2 weeks' time with another episode. It's actually going to be an interesting special episode. We have been invited to attend the Nordic Fintech Summit here in Helsinki. We will be recording a session from the Fintech Summit. And actually, I believe, Ville, you've even got a panel session happening there, right?
Yeah, it's about the ongoing change and digitalization of banking technology, and there's a lot of the panel is really interesting, and it is chaired by Aleksi Grimm from the Bank of Finland. So I'm really looking forward to that panel discussion, and of course all the fun interviews we're going to be doing during the summit.
So I will be walking around through the full time of the summit, looking for interesting fintechs and participants to have a chat with. If you see me there, come up and say hello, and maybe you'll have the opportunity to have a segment in our next podcast episode. Until then, this has been Fintech Daydreaming.
This is Fintech Daydreaming.